You don't wake up, you re-emerge. From fevered half-sleep, tangled in woolen rags soaked with your own sweat, and prayers whispered in the dark, your tongue feels like salted leather. Your joints ache like they've been borrowed from a corpse, and your first thought isn't, "Am I alive?" but rather, "Did I survive the night?" Congratulations, you did, and now you must endure the day. Welcome to the Hospital of 1348. Except it's not called a hospital, it's a house of the poor and sick. And by house they mean a cold, damp stone building that smells like rot and regret. Beds, if you can call them that, are wooden planks or straw bundles. The straw is never clean, you can tell by the movement. Yes, that twitch in your blanket. That isn't a dream, that's a rat. But don't scream, that rat might just save your life. You sit up slowly. Every bone in your spine cracks like old wood. The light is dim, a single beeswax candle fighting a losing battle against the shadows. You hear coughing, so much coughing, a chorus of lungs trying to escape their hosts. There's moaning too, some from pain, some from prayer. One voice recites psalms in Latin, another curses in French. Somewhere nearby, someone has just died. No one reacts. A nun walks by, her habit stained with something brown and long dried. She nods at you without meeting your eyes. She's holding a small knife and a bowl of warm liquid. You hope it's soup. It's not. You look down and see your legs. One is swollen, red. The skin is blistered and angry. You remember the bite? Was it a dog? A rat? A demon in the form of a beggar? It doesn't matter. The wound festers, and now the healers are debating what part of you must be cut away to save the rest. You pray they choose correctly. Across the room, a man screams, not out of fear, but from leeches. They are removing the bad blood, the nun said. You wonder how they know which is which. You try not to look at the bucket beside your bed. Inside, gauze, black with pus, a dead bird. And, yes, a rat, floating belly up in some kind of oil. That's for you, because here, in this world of saints and shadows, mice are medicine. They believe rats absorb disease, that their earthy nature draws out poison. Some say the soul of a rat is immune to evil, and by placing one on your wound, it will pull the sickness from your body into its own. That's the theory. The practice? It involves slicing a live mouse open and placing its warm, twitching body directly onto your infected flesh. No herbs, no anesthetic, just faith, and the hope that the rat dies before you do. One man claimed he was healed this way, others, not so lucky, but stories travel faster than infection, and in 1348, stories are all people have. You lie back. The smell of mold, sweat, and candle wax swirls in your nose. You feel something tickle your foot. You don't move. If it's a rat, let it be. Maybe it's the good kind. A friar enters. His robes rustle like old parchment. He carries a book and a cage. Inside, 3 white mice. Sacred, he says. Born on a saint's feast day, fed only holy crumbs. One of them will visit your wound soon. You nod, unsure if this is a blessing or a punishment. And then, without warning, the pain hits. A healer squeezes your swollen leg. Pus bursts like a blistered fig. You scream. You cry. The room spins. The nun chants. The friar prays. And in that moment you realize something profound. This is the cure, not the painkiller, not the prayer, not even the rat. The ritual is the medicine, the belief, the community, the desperate, shared illusion that something, anything, might work. You pass out from the pain. You dream of fur, of claws, of small, warm bodies crawling over you like a blanket made of nightmares. And when you wake, hours later, your wound is bandaged. You feel no better, maybe worse. But someone whispers, "You're lucky. The rat died first. That's a good sign." You laugh a short, hoarse breath, because somehow that comforts you. And in the darkness of this place, with no science, no hope, and no soap, a dead rat becomes a symbol of survival. Long before medicine had microscopes, it had metaphors. You lived in a world not of bacteria and cells, but of humours and spirits. Illness didn't invade the body, it possessed it. A cough was not a symptom, it was a message, a fever, not a virus, but divine punishment. And rats, well, rats were everywhere, in your attic, in your pantry, in your theology. You see, the medieval world didn't just tolerate rats, it assigned them meaning. A rat was not just vermin, it was a symbol of gluttony, fertility, disease, decay, survival. Depending on who you asked, it was either Satan's courier or nature's little alchemist. And in a world where every natural phenomenon had a spiritual twin, the rat became useful. It started with analogy. Rats are fast. So if your illness is stuck, apply rat to skin and maybe it will run off with the blockage. Rats breed endlessly. If you're barren, rub rat fat on your belly. Maybe their fertility will rub off. Rats survive filth. If you're infected, eat one. Perhaps you too will gain its dirty strength. It sounds absurd, but so does trepanation and drilling holes in skulls to let demons out. And yet people did it. Because medicine then was less about logic and more about symbolic transfer. You hurt, then you need to shift that hurt into an object, a ritual, a rodent. By the 12th century, apothecaries kept dried mice on their shelves like cinnamon sticks with tiny claws. Recipes were scribbled in Latin and Greek, copied over centuries. In England, the Leech Book of Bald recommended boiling mice in beer to treat bedwetting. In Egypt, they were mashed into eye salves. In Rome, Aristotle himself suggested rats as cures for boils. Yes, Aristotle, even the father of logic, thought rodents might balance your bodily humours, but it wasn't just intellectuals. Peasants, midwives, monks all used rats because rats were available, cheap, and most importantly, they didn't fight back. And then came the plague. Black Death rolls into Europe like a slow-moving apocalypse. Bodies pile up, doctors fail, prayers go unanswered, people panic. And where there is panic, there is improvisation. You need medicine. You can't afford imported herbs, but you can find rats, dozens of them, under your floorboards. So you reach for what you know. Burn one, bury one, drink one. Some say boil them with sage, others say skin them alive and place the hide on your buboes. Each region develops its own rat logic. In one village, tail must face east. In another, you must whisper a prayer as you slice. It doesn't matter if it works. What matters is doing something. Desperation breeds ritual. Ritual becomes belief. Belief becomes tradition. Soon the church steps in. Some clerics denounce rat medicine as pagan. Others adopt it, baptize it in holy water, and claim it as divine providence. If the Lord placed the rat upon the earth, one monk wrote, then surely he placed it near the sick for a reason. It becomes medicine by proximity, by faith, by sheer repetition. And centuries later, physicians look back and scoff. But should they? Because in that world and of filth and fear and fungus and fever, the rat was more than an animal. It was a vessel, a way to survive the unbearable, a way to tell yourself, I am not helpless. And sometimes, that's enough to live one more day. There are cookbooks, and then there are grimoires. In the world of pre-modern medicine, the line between chef and sorcerer was dangerously thin, especially when the main ingredient was a rodent. You open a dusty medieval manuscript. The ink is brown, probably blood. The pages smell like mildew and the slow death of paper. And there, written in looping Latin, is a recipe, not for soup, not for stew, for salvation. Recipe 1, for the quenching of fever, mouse, honey, and wine. Take one fresh mouse, alive if possible. Remove hair with hot tongs, mash in mortar with honey and red wine. Strain through cloth. Administer by spoon while warm. That's not from a witch's tale. That's from a 13th century English pharmacopoeia. The idea? The mouse draws heat. Honey soothes. Wine disinfects. Allegedly. If the fever breaks, thank the mouse. If the patient dies, blame the devil. Recipe 2. To cure infantile night. Crying the dried mouse amulet. In early Germanic traditions, a dried mouse was worn around a baby's neck to ward off spirits that caused midnight screams. Sometimes sewn into linen, sometimes tied with a red ribbon, because color scares demons apparently. Imagine being that baby. Your first stuffed animal is an actual animal. Recipe 3 for toothache, roasted mouse. Ash paste. Found in Roman sources and repeated well into the Renaissance. Roast a mouse until blackened. Grind to ash, mix with vinegar and a pinch of salt. Apply to the aching tooth. Today, we call this chemical warfare. Or then it was pain versus pain. You don't notice the toothache if your mouth's on fire. Recipe 4, the Egyptian eye salve. From ancient medical papyri, blend mouse flesh with honey, frankincense, and powdered antimony. Apply under eyelids for clarity of sight. What was it, the mouse, the honey, or just the act of doing something? Historians disagree, but someone believed it. Enough to rub dead mouse into their eyes. Recipe 5. Mouse broth for whooping. Cough. Rural England, 17th century. Mothers boiled whole mice, fur, bones, eyes and all, into a broth. Sometimes added chamomile, sometimes sugar. Then fed by spoon to children gasping for air. If they stopped coughing, the broth was praised. If they didn't, another mouse was added. More mice, more hope. You see, these weren't crazy people, they were desperate people, with no antibiotics, no germ theory, no clean water. But they had rats, and time and belief. Some used mouse fat as balm, others buried dead mice under doorsteps to trap disease spirits. One French healer suggested tying a mouse tail around your wrist to prevent gout. Another claimed that burning a black rat and inhaling the smoke cured melancholia of the womb. Yes, that was a diagnosis. And yes, it probably made everything worse. But here's the truth. These weren't isolated cases. They were widespread, cross-cultural, documented in Europe, Asia, Africa, from palaces to peasant huts, because rats were universal, cheap, repulsive, and somehow sacred. They represented what medicine was for most of history, a mix of instinct, analogy, faith, and the occasional culinary nightmare. And before you laugh, look at your own medicine cabinet. Dead bee venom, mold fungus, botulinum toxin, radioactive iodine, still sounds so different. At least the medievals had the decency to cook the mouse first. Let's say you're sick, not dying, just dissolving, coughing, sweating, nose dripping like a leaky flask, a medieval cold, the kind that lingers like guilt and smells worse. You go to a healer, a village woman with 6 teeth, 4 cats, and 1 philosophy. Balance through transference. She doesn't ask what hurts. She asks what you've touched recently, and when you say a rat, her eyes light up. Perfect. Because in her worldview, rats aren't just creatures, they're vessels. They absorb, reflect, and redistribute bodily energies. If you're too cold, a warm rat brings balance. If you're congested, a rat's guts can pull the blockage outward. And so begins your treatment. Step 1, the compress. The healer slices open a field mouse. Still warm, she wraps it in cloth and places it over your chest. The blood is supposed to draw out phlegm. The smell, a pungent mix of iron and hay, is invigorating, she says. You try not to vomit. She smiles. That's the toxins leaving. Step 2, the poultice. A paste of mashed rat brain, garlic, and boar fat is smeared on your neck glands. Why garlic? It's anti-plague. Why brain? Because the mouse knows survival. Why boar fat? It sticks. You're now a walking buffet for wolves, but apparently that's part of the healing. Step 3. The suppository. This is where you hesitate. A dried mouse tail dipped in goose fat, inserted rectally to stimulate humoral drainage. Popular in certain parts of Eastern Europe, based on the belief that internal obstructions can be tickled free. Yes, tickled by a rodent's tail. You resist. She insists. You compromise. Tail wrapped in cloth. It still counts. Step 4. The ingestion. Roasted mouse powder in wine. A single sip. It tastes like charcoal and barn. She nods approvingly. Now your body will remember its own wildness. You're not sure what that means, but she looks convinced. Now let's pause. These treatments weren't meant to be comfortable. They were meant to be transformative. The worse they tasted, the more they hurt, the better they were believed to work. Pain was proof. Disgust was therapy. And rats? They were medicine because they survived things humans didn't. Filth, poison, fire, plague. If a rat could live through it, maybe some part of it could save you, but the risk? Oh, it was real. Rats carry disease, always did. Typhus, hantavirus, leptospirosis. Ingesting, handling, or even smelling infected tissue could kill you. Fast, horribly. Many cures ended in worse symptoms, fever spikes, gangrene, internal bleeding. But because death was common, the rat was rarely blamed. Instead, it was too late. Or worse, you used the wrong kind of rat. Blame the species, not the superstition. And yet, some lived by luck, by youth, by sheer placebo. And those survivors became proof. Walking testimonies that the method worked. And so the myth grew. In some villages, rats were bred specifically for medicine. Fat ones, wild-eyed, fed herbs and ash, blessed by priests who were half pragmatist, half desperate. In others, only black rats could be used. In Italy, white mice were favored. In Russia, only rats caught on Sundays. For spiritual purity, science had no say. Belief ran the clinic. And for every death, there was a tale of miraculous recovery. A boy whose fever broke the moment the mouse was placed on his chest. A woman who coughed up blood until she swallowed rat broth and lived. A monk who buried a rat under his bed and woke, cured. Never mind the hundreds who didn't. In a world without certainty, the rat became a medicine of maybe. And sometimes, maybe is all you have. You kneel on the frozen flagstones of St. Crispin's infirmary, lungs choked with incense, knees aching like cracked pottery. Around you, stained glass saints ooze purple light onto corpses and coughing bodies. The air smells of myrrh, stirred into offal. Somewhere behind the altar, a novice rattles a thurible hard enough to drown the stench of rot, almost. Somewhere inside the walls, something squeaks. Father Theobald calls that squeak a hymn. The friar's sermon is simple, omnia sunt bona. Everything God made is good, therefore everything can heal, even the grey thing gnawing the communion crumbs. He quotes Isaiah in Latin you barely understand, skipping Leviticus's nasty footnote about unclean creatures. To prove the point, he raises a wooden cage. Inside, 2 mice stare back with pink-rimmed eyes, as though waiting for confession. One blink later, they're on the altar, scuttling over linen embroidered with golden lilies. The congregation gasps, not at the profanity, but at the promise. If God placed the mouse here, he must have hidden medicine beneath its fur. Father Theobald slices a wafer, sprinkles salt atop it, then lets the animals nibble. Sanctification by saliva, he calls it. You wonder whether holiness can survive sharp teeth. Stories help. The friar tells the favourite, Sister Agnes of Dordrecht, 1184. She lay dying of black buboes that swelled like pomegranates. A white mouse appeared, licked each swelling, and died on her chest. Agnes rose the next dawn singing the Te Deum. Ever since, pilgrims have stuffed cages with pale mice, searching for repeat miracles. The friar sells tiny vellum illustrations of the scene, 2 pennies for a miracle you can fold into your breviary. You notice the infirmary coffers look healthier than its patients, but belief is easier than skepticism when your armpits ooze pitch-black pus. So you listen as Theobald moves from miracle to symbolism. In a world obsessed with scapegoats, rodents slide neatly into the role. Small, expendable, perfectly portable guilt. Across Bavaria, he says, villagers trap mice during Lent, paint red crosses on their backs and release them in the graveyard on Maundy Thursday. The animals vanish into the earth, hauling parish sins like furry gravediggers. If winter wheat grows tall that year, the ritual is praised. If famine returns, the mice were insufficiently devout, and the parish catches twice as many next spring. Humility sells almost as well as fear. The friar invokes Christ washing feet, then points to a cage of half-shaven mice. Our Lord stooped to fishermen's sandals. Surely you can stoop to a creature of the gutter. A monk in the back nods so hard his tonsure flaps. You flinch when Father Theobald presses a boiled mouse, still steaming, against the ulcer on a peasant woman's neck. The scent of scorched fur mixes with frankincense. She shrieks. He calls the pain a ladder to heaven. Holy rodents spawn holy commerce. Monasteries across Flanders now breed clerical mice, snow-white, fed on communion crumbs, rumoured to squeak the Gloria if you listen at midnight. A live specimen costs 2 pennies, a sanctified carcass 4. For a silver groat, the friar will butcher it while chanting Psalm 91, Scapulos suis obumbrabit tibi, he shall cover thee with his feathers. You note the mouse has no feathers, then remember logic is not a popular language here. Still, dissent trembles at the edges. Scholar Abbess Hildegard of Bingen once wrote that rodent cures avail little unless the patient trusteth greatly. In plainer words, placebo or bust. Some bishops now label the practice superstitio foetida, rank superstition. Yet their edicts gather dust while plague carts keep moving. It's hard to outlaw hope when death rattles every window. Night falls behind leaded glass. Father Theobald arranges a vigil for the dying. Candles circle your straw pallet like miniature suns. He invokes Saint Gertrude, protector of the plague-ridden and paradoxical patroness of mice. Legend claims any rodent resting on your pillow before dawn guarantees recovery. Sleep becomes a hostage exchange. You trade consciousness for a whiskered miracle. Hours drag, wax pools, flames gutter. Finally, a warm body skitters across your cheek. Tiny claws, a damp nose, the quick nip of curious teeth. Pain jolts you awake, but the friar rejoices. A kiss from heaven. Blood beads where the bite landed. Dawn drips through window lattices, painting dust motes gold. Your fever has ebbed a degree, perhaps coincidence, perhaps the cool night air, perhaps sheer exhaustion. Father Theobald credits Gertrude, collects the empty cages, and leaves one mouse trembling in the rushes, fur singed, tail clipped survivor, or future sacrament, who can tell? You watch its flank rise and fall like a miniature bellows and wonder if it prays for deliverance from you. Weeks later, convalescing at home, you open your psalter to Psalm 22 and find the margin gnawed into lace. Mouse hunger or divine autograph? The friar would call it providence. You call it proof that in this world, salvation often arrives on 4 feet, claws first, demanding blood before blessing. Whether that is faith or folly depends entirely on where the teeth land, on parchment, on plague, swollen flesh, or on the fragile border between belief and despair. You are 7 years old, lungs rattling like pebbles in a tin cup, curled on a straw mattress that smells of damp wool and wood smoke. Outside the croft, Scottish winter is gnawing the hills raw, but inside there is only the crackle of peat and the frantic pulse in your ears. Fever makes the rafters warp and sway. Every shadow looks like a black dog waiting to snatch your breath. You cough so hard your ribs creak, and somewhere behind your eyelids you taste metal. Then you hear it, a squeal, high and sharp, followed by your mother's whisper. Soft, urgent, half prayer, half command. She has caught a rattling, barely weaned, its eyes still milky with newborn blindness. A stringy little thing, patchwork of pink skin and grey fuzz, tail trembling like a question mark. You watch through lashes slick with tears as she kneels by the hearth, presses the creature to the glowing peat, and holds it there just long enough for the fur to smoke. A hiss, a twitch, then silence. The smell is instant and unforgettable. Scorched hair, hot iron, and the faint sweetness of burning fat. Your stomach flips, but your mother's face is fixed, jaw clenched, eyes shining with something fiercer than fear. This is not cruelty, she tells you. This is medicine. She learned the ritual from her own mother, who learned it from the midwife who trudged the glens with a pouch of dried mouse tails and stories thick as porridge. The law says a rat born on the waning moon can steal sickness if its warmth meets a child's skin before its soul escapes. One life, one gift. No room for mercy. Your mother trusts the law because what else is there? No doctor rides this far north. No priest risks the snow. She has a peat fire, a carving knife, and a faith stitched from desperation. She slices the rat from throat to belly, fingertips steady as if fixing a torn hem. The organs glisten jewel-bright in the firelight, a necklace of crimson beads. She scoops them into a wooden bowl, already smeared with goose grease. A mutter of Gaelic words, half blessing, half binding spell, drifts over the stew of blood and fat. Your skin prickles as though the words themselves carry weight. Before the steam fades, she spreads the viscera across your chest, a viscous, beating poultice. It is impossibly warm, almost gentle, and unimaginably wrong. You feel the slide of muscle, the sting where a stray bone scrapes a cracked rib. You gasp. She hushes. "Let it drink the fever," she says, voice shaking like a candle flame. The heat of the rat seeps into your skin. You imagine tiny claws hooking the sickness out, tooth by tooth, dragging it back across the threshold between worlds. Outside, wind rattles the shutters. Inside, the ritual hums. Fire, flesh, breath. Your mother presses her palm over the rat's body, sealing it to your sternum. And for a heartbeat, you feel only her heartbeat, pounding through the thin shield of skin and hope. The room smells worse now. Peat smoke, sour sweat, coppery blood, and the unmistakable tang of fear. But there is something else threading the air, something like resolve. Your mother's gaze never leaves your face. Every flinch of pain maps across her own cheeks. Every wheeze of air into your lungs lifts her shoulders an inch. You realize she is bargaining, offering the rat's spark for yours. In a world that measures love in ounces of coal and crumbs of barley, this is wealth beyond coin. Time slurs. You drift between nightmares, rats dancing in monks' robes, mice gnawing at angel wings, a sea of teeth clicking prayers in the dark, and moments of sharp clarity where the ceiling's smoke-black beams feel close enough to touch. Somewhere, a neighbor's baby wails. Somewhere, a sheep bell clanks. Somewhere, a star explodes in the sky, and no one notices. Fever maps its constellations on your skin. Beneath your mother's hand, the rat cools, stiffens, becomes just meat, then less than meat. A hollow charm that may or may not have swallowed your illness. When dawn finally trickles grey through the cracks, you are not better, but you are breathing. Slower, steadier, without the rasp like tearing cloth. Your mother lifts the small carcass, now cold as riverstone, and studies it. She says she can see the sickness in its bones, a shadowy bruise spreading under greasy fur. Perhaps she truly does. She wraps it in burlap and buries it beyond the threshold, deep in the frost-hard earth, so the fever cannot crawl back. You hear her murmuring thanks to the Virgin, to the rat, to whatever ancient spirit trades life for life in these hills. Days pass. Your cough loosens. Your eyes clear. Winter retreats by inches. The story that will follow you all your life is born. The rat took the sickness. Neighbors will hear and nod, some with awe, some with disgust, all with understanding, because they too have bartered with creatures of the dark. A mouse strung around a neck for teething, a toad baked in a loaf for dropsy, a black cock split at midnight to bleed out consumption. Survival is a ledger kept in blood and superstition, and every family writes its own entries. Years later, you will stand in a city street, watch a chemist measure penicillin into a glass vial, clean, precise, odorless, and think of your mother's trembling hands, the hiss of fur on peat, the way hope smelled like burning hair. You will feel gratitude and loss, and a strange kinship with the rat, whose name you never knew, because part of you still believes your breath carries its heartbeat, that every laugh you've ever laughed rattled first in its tiny ribs. Some nights, when illness brushes your house and the sterile pills line up like soldiers on the nightstand, you'll dream of that croft, the peat fire, the snow-muffled world, the exchange-note textbook records. You'll wake with the ghost of warmth pressed to your chest and wonder whether science is nothing more than ritual made palatable, whether we have truly banished the old bargains or merely swapped fur for glass and called it progress. Outside your window, city lights drown the stars, but in the alley below, something squeaks persistent, alive. You listen, hand over your heart, and almost say thank you. The first thing you notice is the stink, sharp, fatty, unmistakable. It creeps into your nostrils before your eyelids even lift, a putrid perfume that makes you gag, yet oddly reassures you. Because here, in this rattling ward of half-dead bodies and half-lived prayers, that smell is hope. The reek of mouse grease means someone has decided you are still worth the trouble. If the healer bothers to melt rodent fat and smear it on your skin, you must be salvageable. You lie on a pallet of straw that crackles every time you breathe. Moonlight seeps through a broken shutter, silvering the haze of smoke and human sweat. Somewhere close, a woman mutters the pater noster between coughs. Farther off, a man hawks mucus into a bowl with clinks loud enough to be coins. Beneath it all thrums the scurrying, chewing, squeaking chorus of the true nurses of this place. Dozens of mice, maybe hundreds, invisible but omnipresent, stitching through rushes and rafters like frantic little medics. A figure bends over you. Old Meg, fixer of bones, puller of teeth, brewer of nearly drinkable beer. She smells like nettle broth and despair. In one hand, she holds a clay pot warmed near the hearth. In the other, a feather plucked from a goose that never imagined it would retire as a paintbrush. Meg dips the feather into the pot, and the room fills with a hiss of rendered lard mixed with something darker. Mouse fat, simmered with juniper and ash, seasoned with a single drop of vinegar for bite. She daubs it along the angry strip of infection climbing your shin. The salve looks like candle wax crossed with gutter sludge. It feels hotter than any comfort should. You hiss, she cackles, sound medicine evidently. You ask why it must smell this way. Meg shrugs. A clean scent doesn't frighten evil humors, a foul one does. She gestures to your wound. Bad flesh listens to stronger odors, like dogs to a louder master. You do not remind her that dogs sometimes bite the louder master. Instead, you inhale shallowly, letting the fumes prick tears from your eyes. She nods approvingly. Watering eyes prove the treatment is seeping inward. Hours pass in a fever haze. The mouse grease crusts, stiff as old beeswax. Every time you shift, the scabbed fat cracks, releasing new pockets of stink. You imagine tiny ghosts escaping, each carrying a droplet of pus. Meg returns at dawn, sniffs you and smiles. "Good," she says. "You smell riper." In her cosmology, healing is a curve that peaks in putrefaction. If the salve rots on you, it means the rot is leaving you. Sweet aromas belong to corpses washed for burial. The living should reek like compost turning into soil. Later that day, Brother Alaric, the resident monk scribe, hobbles over with a scrap of parchment. He's cataloguing cures, he says. "And would you mind describing the odor so future generations may recognize it?" You summon poetic courage, like tallow left too long in the sun, stirred with wet wool and a hint of singed feather. Alaric dips his quill. "Excellent," he murmurs, as though noting notes of clove in fine wine. He tells you the legend of Saint Brigid, who supposedly healed a leper by covering him with freshly killed mice, their holy aroma drawing disease out through his pores. You ask if the leper survived. Alaric admits the chronicle ends abruptly. But the saint's fame endured, which is almost the same. When night settles again, the ward becomes a greenhouse of rodent vapors. Every patient glistens under a glaze of fat. Candles sputter against the oily air. Yet something shifts. The moans ease, breaths lengthen, even the drips of blood feel quieter. Maybe it's exhaustion, maybe it's the mild antiseptic bite of juniper. Or maybe communal stink unites the room in shared delusion, forging a pact between flesh and faith. We will breathe this foulness together until we either rise or rot. Your fever breaks on the third dawn. You wake soaked in a cold sweat that smells faintly of musk and victory. Meg peels away the bandage. Beneath it, the redness has retreated, edges pink instead of purple, scab dry instead of weeping. She gives the wound a satisfied poke. You yelp. She declares you mended. As a final rite, she scrapes off the crusted mouse-fat scab and tosses it into the hearth, where it sizzles like meat hitting iron. The smoke billows upward, thick and rancid. Everyone in the ward bolts awake, cursing. Meg laughs so hard she coughs. You swing your legs over the pallet, surprised they obey. When your foot touches the stone floor, a mouse darts between your toes and vanishes into straw. You don't flinch. Instead, you feel an odd tenderness, as if the creature came to collect its residual wages, a whiff of stolen fever, a scrap of your pain. You whisper thanks, half joking, wholly sincere. Outside, the wind carries the scent of wet earth and dung, nothing compared to what you endured, which means nothing to fear. You breathe deep, testing ribs, testing hope. Behind you, the ward resumes its rhythm of coughs and prayers, but you step into the yard where sunlight slices the mist like a new promise. A stable boy wrinkles his nose when you pass. You grin, remembering Meg's dictum, "Sweetness is for the dead." Let him cringe. Your ripe stink is proof you are still stubbornly, gloriously alive. That night, you wash in a brook, scrubbing until skin shines raw, and a pang of doubt creeps in. Perhaps you're rinsing away the last of the magic. Yet, as the grease floats downstream, you feel lighter, not cursed. You realize the cure was never truly the fat, or the juniper, or even the mouse. It was the story, the insistence that life could be coaxed back by something as lowly as vermin. The smell was a banner announcing belief, and belief, against odds, sometimes bullies the body into compliance. You dry yourself on the moonlit grass and hear scuttling in the hedgerow. Tiny eyes catch a shard of starlight. You salute them. Somewhere, Meg is preparing another pot, another patient is praying for pungency, and the ward will reek anew by dawn. Let it. Till better miracles arrive, the kingdom of mice will keep its post. The market square reeks of onions, wet wool, and panic. Stalls groan under sacks of grain. and bundles of dried herbs, but the longest line forms beside a cart draped in black cloth stamped with a silver sigil. A rat coiled around a chalice. Behind it stands Dr. Magnus of Lübeck, broad-shouldered, fox-eyed, beard oiled to a sinister point. He wears a spotless velvet cap, proof he never stoops low enough to soil it. In his gloved hands he brandishes a latticework cage packed tight with quivering rodents. Their fur is groomed, their whiskers trimmed. They look almost respectable, like choir boys forced into Vermin costumes. Magnus clears his throat. The crowd hushes as though scripture is about to be read. He begins. Bodies are besieged by miasmic vapors that swirl in the air like invisible wolves. Only one creature can sniff out the wolves and swallow them whole, the humble rat, blessed with a stomach that fears no corruption. If you purchase one of his certified therapeutic specimens and nestle it against the skin, the beast will draw out the poison, absorb it, and expire nobly in your stead. He raises a dead rat pickled in wine, holds it to the light. "Behold," he says, voice oiled with certainty, "the martyrdom of medicine. Coins clink like hail on the cart as peasants, merchants, even a passing friar shove toward the front. Some buy the rats alive, wrapped in linen pouches stamped with seals of wax and Latin blessings. Others pay extra for pre-pickled carcasses steeped in rosemary brine, a touch of luxury for those who can afford to smell something other than death. A widow parts with her last copper groat for a runt said to cure widow-making fevers. A baker coughs into his sleeve, splashes silver, and receives a fat black rat whose tail sports a silk ribbon. Proof of premium stock. Would you linger at the fringe, half skeptic, half desperate? Last night, your neighbor's daughter coughed up something that looked like tar. This morning she was glassy-eyed, stripped of breath. Her father claims one of Magnus's rats could have saved her had he had the coin. The rumor gnaws at you like hunger. What if gold-fleeced promises can for once buy you an extra day above ground? Magnus's apprentice, a pimply youth in a moth-eaten surcoat, weaves through the crowd, whispering up charges. For 2 pennies, he'll scratch the rat behind the ears so it imprints on you, guaranteeing stronger transference. For 3, he'll mutter a fragment of the Athanasian Creed into its whiskers, confusing illness with theology. A gaunt woman asks if the rats are truly blessed. The apprentice nicks his thumb, dots a cross of blood on the rat's forehead, and says nothing travels faster to heaven than a creature that tunnels. Near sunset, the square transforms into a carnival of barter and dread. Empty cages pile up like spent reliquaries. Rats vanish into pouches, pockets, breastplates. Some buyers tie them around the neck with twine so the little bodies bump against the heart, each thud a reminder that fear now has fur. You see a man leading 2 children, tails swinging from their belts like talismans. They march proud as crusaders, tiny soldiers armed with squeak and sinew. But profit breeds innovation. Magnus unveils his newest marvel, pulvis murinus, mouse powder, ground with amber and saltpeter, sold in stoppered glass vials. Sprinkle it on wounds, he claims, and watch rot retreat. A merchant with a gangrenous toe buys 2, pops a cork, and snorts the dust in front of everyone. He gags, eyes watering, but nods in approval. Pain, after all, is half the point. Night cools the stones, but business stays fever-hot. By torchlight you spy a competing healer, a rag-wrapped crone, selling knockoff rats scrawnier than gutter rumors. She shouts that her rodents drink plague twice as fast because they were caught in cemeteries. Magnus's men surround her stall, accuse her of false benedictions. A scuffle erupts. Cages tumble. Rats scatter like spilled beads. Children shriek, chasing them for luck. Adults shriek, fearing contagion. Someone's torch drops. Hay ignites. A brief blaze licks the dusk. Amid chaos, Magnus climbs atop his cart, arms raised like a prophet commanding locusts. He bellows that only his rats bear papal indulgence. Yes, he claims to have papers. Any rival vermin are hell-spawned decoys. The crowd surges back to him, charred beliefs smouldering but intact. You finally step forward, coins sweaty in your palm. Magnus selects a mouse, so white it seems carved from candle wax. He places it in your hand, warm, trembling, alive with the thrum of a heartbeat terrifyingly similar to your own. He leans close, whispers a guarantee, when the mouse dies, you will live. His breath smells of cloves masking something sour. You nod, though you're not sure who's convincing whom. At home, you light a single tallow candle. The mouse blinks at the flame, nose twitching. You press it to the swelling beneath your collarbone. Its tiny claws clutch your skin. The warmth is startling, intimate. You wait for a sensation, a revelation, a miracle. There is only the soft metronome of two creatures afraid of the dark. Hours pass. The mouse nuzzles, then stills. Dawn seeps through the shutters. You feel, no worse, perhaps a shade better. The swelling seems less angry, though skepticism reminds you, dawn light flatters everything. You lift the motionless body. A sigh escapes you, half relief, half sorrow. Somewhere in your chest the absurd hope stirs. Maybe the trade worked. Maybe fear, packaged and sold, can be transformed into faith by the simple alchemy of survival. In the weeks that follow, Magnus's rat trade spreads. From Lübeck to Bruges, from Bruges to Paris, riding plague carts like royalty. Doctors denounce him, yet secretly order crates. Bishops condemn him, yet bless his shipments. City councils ban street vendors, only to auction exclusive licenses. The rat becomes cure, commodity, and curse in one furry parcel, and every buyer swears an oath. If the creature dies first, it's proof positive. If they die first, well, someone must have swapped in a counterfeit. You keep the little corpse in a wooden box lined with rag. Some nights you open it, expecting rot. Instead, you smell only faint straw and something almost medicinal, like dried thyme. You wonder if that is evidence, or simply the memory you need in order to keep breathing. Outside, the market wheel turns. New doctors will hawk powders, potions, and promises more expensive than mice, but rarely more convincing. Yet, for a brief, fever-bright moment in history, salvation fit in the palm of your hand, nose twitching, heart racing, priced to sell before it died. And that somehow felt like enough. You step off the sooty train in 1895 London, 30 years after germ theory hatched under Pasteur's microscope and already strutting like a smug rooster. The city smells of coal and chloroform, progress and sewage. Newspapers trumpet miracles, antiseptics, x-rays, serums distilled from horse blood. Surgeons brag they can open a man's abdomen without sentencing him to an early grave. All very modern, very clinical, until a medical student at King's College cracks open a medieval leech book for a term paper and finds a recipe that begins, "Take ye a mouse, boil it with honey." He laughs so hard his pince-nez falls into the dissecting basin. His professor, fresh from praising Lister's carbolic spray, chuckles along. Imagine trusting plague-ridden vermin as panacea. The class snickers. Notebook margins bloom with doodles of plague doctors stuffing rats into pill bottles. The consensus is clear. Those were the dark ages, awash in superstition and rat stink. We, thank God, are enlightened. Yet behind the lecture hall, in a brick annex that reeks of phenol and rabbit chow, another cadre of scientists breed mice by the hundreds. They shave patches of fur, drip serums under delicate skin, time how long it takes for tumors to sprout or shrink. Tiny whiskered bodies become living spreadsheets. Column A survives penicillin, column B does not. Every new, civilized breakthrough stands on a pyramid of squeaks. The irony fidgets in its cage, unnoticed. As bacteriology conquers headlines, historians exhume mouldering manuscripts to ridicule. One Lancet editorial from 1903 rails against rodent sorcery, quoting a 14th century cure for gout, roasted mouse ash, rubbed on swollen toes, then pats itself on the back for championing salicylic acid instead. Another journal republishes a Scottish folk charm in which a newborn rat poultice draws the fever like moth to flame, labelling it proof of peasant ignorance. Readers shudder appreciatively over breakfast. Across the channel, Louis Pasteur's protégé extracts serum from infected rabbits, inject it into dogs, then into humans, proclaiming victory over rabies. They never mention that their lab's basement heaves with cages where white mice gnaw seeds in perpetual twilight, awaiting the next experiment. Rodents are now instruments, not ointments, acceptable so long as they die behind closed doors and under Latin labels. By 1928, Alexander Fleming peers at his accidental mouldy petri dish, penicillin halos flaring like sunrise, and confirms his hunch by streaking bacteria across mouse bellies. When the mice live, he cheers. When they don't, he tweaks dosage and tries again. Headlines hail him as savior, scarcely noting the bodies he stepped over, 1,000 silent martyrs whose last meal was crumbs of Nobel glory. You read these clippings in a smoky pub, pint sweating in your hand, and feel time buckle. Medieval healers laid mice upon wounds, believing disease would jump ship. Modern healers inject disease into mice to see if medicine will hold the line. Either way, the mouse is middleman, ferrying sickness for a fare it never gets to spend. Jump to 1944. War hospitals overflow with gangrene, and doctors scramble for antibiotics faster than factories can bottle them. In basement labs, technicians plunge syringes into mouse tails, clock survival rates, ship promising vials to the front. Some soldiers write home that life was saved by a miracle drug. None mention the battalions of rodents that field-tested salvation first. History books will later tally human casualties, not rodent ones. Progress has an official counting system, and squeaks do not register. By 1970, the World Health Organization dismisses rodent-based folk remedies as cultural curiosities, yet funds ever larger vivariums to test vaccines. At medical conferences, slides display Kaplan-Meier curves overlaid on line-drawn mice, cartoon martyrs outfitted with statistical halos. No one in the audience smells burning fur or hears bones crack in miniature mouths. They smell hotel coffee and hear applause. Distance deodorizes. Late-night archivists keep unearthing older recipes. Mouse wine for fever, mouse smoke for melancholy. Scientific journals publish them in satirical corners garnished with anthropological scorn. Yet in those same journals, new studies trumpet murine model demonstrates promising results against glioblastoma. The language is different, the dependency identical. The future still runs on rodent labor, only now it wears a sterilized lab coat. You stand in a modern oncology wing, white walls, soft beeps, antiseptic musk, and watch a patient receive an experimental monoclonal antibody that took 10 years of mouse-based trials. The IV bag hangs like a drip of moonlight. The patient whispers, "Thanks to the doctor thanks biotech investors. The investors thank regulatory fast tracks." Nobody thanks the cage, stacked in a windowless sub-basement, where a colony of genetically identical mice once traded their brief, bright spark so this stranger might cling to his. Medicine, you realize, never stopped bartering with rodents. It simply changed the currency from visible guts to invisible data. The disgust leveled at medieval poultices masks an ongoing debt, a ledger inked in silence. We mock ancestors who placed warm corpses on wounds, yet raise no eyebrow at chimeric mice grown with human immune systems, doomed by design. In a century or two, someone may dissect our journals and sneer at how primitive we were, injecting cell lines into animals instead of printing organs from stem cell gel. relying on furred intermediaries instead of digital twins. They will shake their heads, appalled that we called ourselves advanced, while a squeak still signaled both the start and end of every clinical prayer. Leaving the hospital, you catch a glimpse of a janitor pausing by a loading dock. He flicks crumbs toward a lone city mouse skulking beneath dumpsters. The creature snatches them, vanishes. For a heartbeat, you imagine it glowing faintly with the ghosts of cures past, an unknowing heir to centuries of borrowed luck. You exhale a shaky laugh. Somewhere between superstition and science, between boiled poultice and CRISPR splice, the mouse remains medicine, sometimes absurd, sometimes miraculous, always expendable. The night air tastes of diesel and disinfectant. Streetlights hum like incubators. You walk on, pocket heavy with progress, trying not to think about how many tiny hearts had to stop so yours could keep going, and how, in another age, someone might press your cooled body against a stranger's skin and call it healing. Courtroom lights buzz like a hive of fluorescent hornets, and you find yourself on the witness stand of history, sworn to tell the truth about things best left buried with the plague carts. The bailiff recites charges: animal cruelty, unlicensed surgery, public indecency, and every count began, once upon a midnight filthy, with someone grasping a squealing rat and saying, "This'll fix it." You gulp, raise your right hand, and let the record show 5 exhibits of medicinal madness that would land any medieval healer in handcuffs faster than you can say, rabies, quarantine. Exhibit 1 waddles forward on a greasy memory, the rectal rat enema of 14th century Pavia. Picture a brass syringe the size of a flute, packed with broth, brewed from 3 simmered mice, fennel seeds, and old wine dregs turned to vinegar. The patient, often a constipated noble whose bowels had staged a mutiny, knelt over a pail while a barber surgeon pumped the warm slurry northward. Minutes later, the noble erupted like an unblocked chimney, convinced the rodents had chewed loose the intestinal devil. Today, you'd face animal abuse statutes for boiling live mice and malpractice suits for turning a human colon into a vermin jacuzzi. Exhibit 2 slinks in wearing a crimson cloak of embarrassment, roasted mouse ash suppositories for hemorrhoids. In York, 1432, local statutes fined citizens more for swearing in church than for selling these pellets under the table at Sunday market. Healers flash-charred mice in bread ovens, ground the carbonized remains with pig lard, rolled the paste into thumb-thick torpedoes, and shoved them where the sun never shone. The logic? Firefight scorched fur versus burning veins. Modern law would classify that as aggravated assault with a biological weapon, not to mention food safety violations that could shut down half the bakeries in England. Exhibit 3 squeals its way from the birthing chamber, the vaginal ratotherapy prescribed for obstinate infertility. Midwives in 17th century Lorraine swore that the fertility of rodents rubbed off, literally, on women desperate for a child. They prepared a poultice of minced newborn mice, rue, and sheep's milk curd. It was inserted with a wooden spatula, while prayers to St. Anne filled the room like incense. To contemporary ears, this is sexual assault compounded by unsanitary animal handling. An arresting officer's dream of stacking felonies, cruelty, battery, unauthorized tissue transplantation, take your pick. Exhibit 4 limps in on gangrenous toes, fresh rat skins stitched over frostbite. Arctic trappers of Muscovy believed that a rat's knack for surviving in sewers translated to resurrection of dying flesh. They trapped the beasts, slit them belly to tail, scraped out innards, and wrapped the pink hide around numbed feet like grisly moccasins. If the toe blackened further, they blamed a lazy rat, not bacteria. Today, you'd be cited for practicing medicine without a license and for violating every infection control protocol known to humankind. Plus, you'd answer to a parade of animal welfare lawyers brandishing color photographs and ice-cold wrath. Exhibit 5 shambles under the weight of collective nausea, internal fumigation against lung rot. Ballymena, 1721. Consumptives lay beneath a canopy tent while a brazier roasted rats mixed with pine resin. The smoke funneled through a leather tube directly into their mouths. The theory argued that rodent vapors, sturdy enough to thrive in cesspits, would coax tubercular lungs back to vigor. What it actually delivered was a bouquet of burnt fur, ammonia, and sorrow. In the 21st century, even the suggestion of hot boxing a patient with rodent smoke would trigger criminal negligence, EPA violations, and a viral expose on every screen before sunset. You finish your testimony. The judge, gavel poised, eyes the gallery. Where modern physicians clutch hand sanitizer like rosaries, jurors gag behind surgical masks while activists hoist posters of cartoon mice in angel halos. The evidence is overwhelming. History is guilty of atrocities committed in the holy name of healing. Yet, as the gavel slams, you feel a prickle of complicity. Outside the courthouse, pharmaceutical towers gleam. Inside their labyrinths, colonies of lab mice still live and die. For pills that line your bathroom shelf, different methods, shinier instruments, but the barter remains. Rodent life for human relief. The crowd files out muttering about past barbarities, blind to the present's sanitized squeaks beneath stainless steel lids. On the courthouse steps, a street performer wearing a plague doctor mask juggles plush toy rats to lure tips from passing tourists. Children laugh, parents shudder, coins clink, commerce disguised as spectacle. You smell synthetic fur, warmed by sun, and remember the scorched hair tang of the old remedies. For an instant, the centuries overlap like transparency sheets. A medieval barber with his brass syringe, a modern scientist with a micro pipette, both chasing the same slippery ghost called cure. You tuck your witness badge into your coat, certain no one will believe half of what you've said. But tonight, some insomniac will scroll through archives, find the same leech book recipe, and tweet it as grim trivia. Tomorrow, a biomedical intern will euthanize a mouse and jot down a data point that inches a drug trial forward. The line between then and now is thinner than rat whiskers, and the law, so proud of its bright boundaries, can't erase the shadows where desperation and hope keep shaking paws. A gust of city wind scatters paper cups across the pavement. One tumbles against your boot, and for a heartbeat you imagine it squeaks. You step aside, half expecting a tiny pink nose to peek out. Nothing, just litter. Still you whisper, sorry. Old habits, like old remedies, die hard. Then you walk away, carrying the uncomfortable knowledge that, were history reversed, you too might be the barber warming rat broth over a brazier. Because when survival corners you, legality is often the first thing to scurry down the drain. You sit at the edge of a straw mattress, fingernails black with soil, palms stamped with the day's blisters. Outside, twilight drips down the thatch, carrying the smell of damp earth and unburied sewage. Inside, a single tallow candle gutters, painting the walls with nervous shadows. Your child coughs in the corner, thin, persistent, a metronome of dread. And you feel the old quicksand tug of panic. You have no physician, no coin, no comforting theory of microbes. What you do have is a burlap pouch containing one twitching mouse caught at dawn in the grain bin. And you believe down in the marrow where logic never ventures that this creature can bargain with the darkness. Belief is not a luxury, it is a reflex. In a world where thunder is a sermon and crop failure a verdict, faith grows like mold on every surface. You see patterns in smoke, omens in goat entrails, warnings in the hiccup of a candle flame. Certainty is scarce, so the mind improvises. When fever takes a neighbor on Monday and a mouse poultice spares another on Wednesday, the ledger of coincidence encrypts itself into law. Humans are story eaters. Give them two events and they will chew them into cause and effect. seasoning with fear until the flavor is unforgettable. Desperation sharpens this appetite. Hunger thins the blood, cold gnaws the bones, childbirth courts the grave. Every task, tending turnips, hauling water, lighting the hearth, brushes shoulders with mortality. The brain, cornered, looks for escape hatches. Enter the mouse, small, cheap, and conveniently liminal, half wild, half tame, scurrying between loft and sewer like a courier, shuttling messages across worlds. If evil travels in miasmas and devils ride fleas, perhaps virtue can hitchhike on whiskers. It is a logic built from broken bricks, yet the only shelter available. Fear alone would not sustain the ritual. Hope is the mortar. You have seen miracles or heard them from lips too cracked to lie. A boy whose pox dried overnight after a ratskin bandage. A midwife who swears by mouse broth for stopping postpartum bleeding. A toothless crone whose cancerous lump receded once she slept with a dead mouse tied to her breast. You do not ask for affidavits. The stories arrive already clothed in wonder, and wonder is warmer than doubt. Placebo, centuries before the word, strolls into the room in a burlap coat. You sip mouse-fat wine, gag, and feel heat bloom in your gut. You mistake disgust for efficacy. The healer chants psalms while stitching rat hide to frostbitten toes. The chant, not the hide, slows your pulse. Suffering itself becomes metric. The more it stings, the more surely sin must be leaving. Pain is a receipt printed in nerves, proof that payment has been made. Community reinforces the spell. At dusk, the village gathers like teeth around the bonfire, swapping remedies the way soldiers swap scars. A neighbor's endorsement weighs more than a scholar's. If the blacksmith's wife vouches for rat smoke, skepticism feels like an insult to the anvil that shoes your mule. Conformity camouflages as prudence. If everyone reeks of mouse grease, at least no one can single you out for the next witch hunt when the harvest fails. Authority adds a seal. When the local priest sprinkles holy water on a cage of white mice during Michaelmas Mass, the remedy graduates from folk rumour to quasi-sacrament. Heaven, after all, once used a burning bush. Why not a squeaking pouch? And if the priest collects a penny tithe per mouse, well, salvation has always kept one hand in the purse. Memory, too, conspires. You recall the cures that work and bury the ones that don't. That time Aunt Elsbeth's fever broke naturally 2 hours after the poultice, etched forever. The dozen times it didn't, filed under silence. Survivorship bias wraps itself in linen and passes for evidence. Generations compress centuries of outcomes into a handful of shining anecdotes, polished smooth by retelling until all the jagged deaths fall away. Over everything looms mortality, a moon no cloud can hide. When half the graves in the churchyard cradle children's bones, you make peace with unreason. You'd let a rat crawl across your eyelids, drink its broth, wear its tail as a necklace, if there's even a whisper that it might buy another sunrise. The calculus is cruel but simple. Shame weighs nothing beside a coffin. And so tonight, you take the mouse from its pouch. Its heart thrums against your palm, frantic as your own. Your child's cough flares wet and thunderous. You press the mouse, alive, warm, terrified, against the little ribcage. Tiny claws scrabble for purchase, leaving white lines that fade almost instantly. You murmur a prayer stitched from scraps of Latin and lullaby. Minutes stretch like drawn wire. Then the coughing fits wane, replaced by shallow, even breaths. Perhaps coincidence, perhaps luck, perhaps the fever ebbing on its own schedule. But tomorrow, when dawn unlids the sky and your child still breaths, you will not thank randomness. You will thank the mouse. Days later, you bury its stiffened body at the garden's edge, under marigolds reputed to guard against plague. You whisper gratitude and feel a ripple of safety radiate from the damp earth. The belief settles, roots deep, ready to bloom the next time illness darkens your doorway. Centuries hence, researchers will label this psychology, agency in chaos, narrative cohesion under threat, conditioned reinforcement. They will map the synapses that ignite when ritual meets relief. They will write papers, win grants, invent anesthetics so potent no one needs scream into straw ever again. Yet even as steel needles replace warm bodies, even as microscopes exile demons from the bloodstream, the old reflex lingers. Hope still borrows any tool at hand, reasonable or not, to pry open the future. And somewhere, in a sterile lab lit by LED halos, a white mouse twitches in its cage while technicians evaluate the next miracle drug. You can almost hear history chuckle. New century, same wager. The costumes change, linen to latex, torch to lamina hood. But the underlying prayer is familiar. Take this, small life, let mine continue. You stand from the mattress, joints creaking like door hinges, and open the shutter. Dawn spills in, pale and cold, but alive. You breathe it deep, tasting dew and ash and the faintest echo of rodent musk. Against all arithmetic, belief brought you another morning. You will question it later. Doubt can wait for daylight. For now you whisper a thank you into the thawing air, half to the heavens, half to the garden mound, where one mouse rests as insurance against the dark. Then you turn to the child, eyes still closed, chest rising steady, and decide it is enough. You walk through a corridor that smells of bleach, plastic, and the faint, metallic hum of fluorescent lights. It could be any modern research center, ID badges, quiet shoes, screens glowing with spreadsheets, but you know where the stories hide. Down one final hallway, past a door that hisses when it seals, you reach the mouse room. Inside, stacked polycarbonate cages, each a tiny acrylic universe, climate-controlled and utterly sterile. The animals are white as unbaked bread, eyes like garnets, hearts stuttering at 800 beats per minute. They do not squeak much. Decades of selective breeding have sanded their voices down to polite whispers. You wonder if silence was part of the plan or just collateral evolution. After all, it's easier to hear the machines think when the mice don't complain. A technician in a pastel gown lifts one by the scruff, almost tender, and slides a microchip under its skin. Data blooms on a monitor. Weight, pulse, genome edits. Numbers singing the mouse's biography in binary. Somewhere, an algorithm decides whether this creature will test painkillers, cosmetics, oncology cocktails, or the gravitational stresses of long-term spaceflight. The little body blinks, legs bicycling air, and you feel medieval déjà vu. Different tools, same exchange, animal panic, traded for human promise. You remember Father Theobald pressing boiled vermin to plague sores. You recall old Meg's mouse-fat salve and Dr. Magnus flogging therapeutic specimens in a marketplace ripe with dread. Those scenes reeked of fire and fear. This one reeks of asepsis and certainty. Yet behind every mask you catch the same flicker, a primitive prayer that the boundary between death and life can be bartered with fur. A researcher passes, murmuring that the trial's Phase 2 results look encouraging. You imagine a medieval healer boasting that yesterday's poultice took splendidly. Language evolves, hope rarely does. We still measure progress in lives postponed, not lives saved, because the end remains inevitable. The mouse is simply the scale we slide our anxieties along, first literal, now metaphorical, soon perhaps digital, but always squeaking somewhere beneath the floorboards of our confidence. You exit the lab and step onto a city street vibrating with electric buses and espresso steam. Billboards flex holograms of pharma brands, all pastel gradients and lowercase compassion. One slogan, Tomorrow's Health Today, shifts to reveal a family laughing on a beach, unsullied, by rogue cells, fine print scrolls beneath their feet, trial data derived from murine studies. The word murine feels like a magic trick. 3 crisp syllables that tuck the mouse out of sight, as if Latin could pull a shroud over whiskers. A cafe door swings open, roasted bean aroma collides with diesel fumes. You order a double espresso to chase the lab stench from your sinuses. The barista's forearm sports a QR code tattoo linking to her genealogy profile. She jokes that she's 34% Neanderthal. You nod politely, thinking of CRISPR kits mailed to hobbyists, DIY edits buzzing in garages. When we splice our own genes without batting an eye, will we look back at lab mice with the same smirk we aim at medieval poultices? Or will we grow nostalgic for a time when someone else still did the suffering for us? The espresso scalds your tongue, grounding you. Across the street, a pet store window glitters with hamster wheels and neon bedding. Children press noses to glass, giggling at rodents in tutus. You imagine telling them that somewhere nearby their plush cousin is absorbing cancer, so a stranger's grandmother can dance another spring. You don't, because fairy tales are kinder when the monsters stay unseen. A sudden rain turns the pavement slick. The smell of wet asphalt mingles with ozone, modern petrichor. You pull up your collar and recall the Scottish croft, the hiss of fur on peat, the thready pulse of a dying rat passed like a torch to a feverish child. The method felt monstrous yet intimate. Today's swaps are sanitized but also outsourced. You donate blood to an anonymized cloud, click consent boxes you barely skim, and call it civic duty. How clean should a miracle feel before we miss the grit that proves it costs something? The downpour eases. You head toward the river, where a bronze statue honors pioneers of modern medicine. At its base, a barely noticed relief shows 2 lab mice curled around a caduceus. Tourists snap photos focusing on the towering physicians, ignoring the bronze rodents that hold the scene together like commas in a prayer. You pause, fingertips brushing the cool metal, and wonder if a millennium from now some archivist will unearth our trial protocols the way we dug up leech books. Will they laugh at tree diagrams of dosing schedules, marvel at how primitive infusion pumps look, scoff that we once needed living intermediaries to validate molecules? You picture their future tools, quantum tissue printers, algorithmic avatars, then picture them raising an eyebrow at you through deep-time glass. Why did they believe? You know the answer already. The same reason a mother burned a rat in a hearth, the same reason a monk kissed vermin wounds, the same reason a technician checks vital signs on a cage label, because uncertainty is unbearable and every era sells its own version of certainty at the highest price the desperate can afford. Night gathers. Streetlights sizzle on, casting halos in the mist. You take the long way home along the embankment, shoes whispering on slick stone. A real, wild mouse darts across your path, brown, rain-soaked, alive on its own terms. It pauses, sniffing, wholly indifferent to your grand reflections. You freeze, half expecting the universe to wink. The mouse bolts into darkness, no candles, no data charts, no transaction, just survival for survival's sake. You exhale, heavier and lighter at once. The ancient debt between species lingers, unpaid but acknowledged. You whisper thanks to the lab colonies, to the peat fire martyrs, to the nameless sprinting silhouette, and feel absurdly grateful for the hot shower that awaits, for antibiotics that cost less than bread, for the fragile privilege of flinching at history instead of living inside it. Finally, you cross your doorway, shake off the rain, and flick on a lamp that hums like a restrained swarm. Tomorrow, bright screens will present new cures, new controversies, new whiskered volunteers. Tonight, you set your meds on the nightstand, trace the embossed rodent on a pill bottle you'd never noticed, and climb into a mattress soft enough to forget plague straw. As you drift towards sleep, a last thought skitters through the quiet. If some future soul unravels today's miracles and finds them primitive, perhaps they'll still feel what you feel now. A nervous, humbled gratitude that someone once dared to believe hard enough to offer up a mouse so the rest of us could keep borrowing days. Outside, rain taps a lullaby on the gutter,